with the Z. I'm gonna have you start it and I'm gonna watch the belts. Yo, none of these pulleys are spinning at all. And it looks like it's about to fall off. Dude, that's crazy. That's really scary. Alright, so in the last video, started having issues with the crank pulley slipping. Now I'm thinking the issue with the crank pulley slipping can be two different things. One, the rubber inside of the crank pulley could have given out, or two, there is not a key, so this just has all the opportunity to slip. So let's start this up again and see if the entire pulley is slipping or just the outside of it. Whoa! Wow, the middle of the pulley is spinning and the outside is not. So it's just that the pulley came apart. I was actually wrong on that. The inside of the pulley is not spinning, just the crank bolt is spinning, as you can see here. So it is crank slip. So let's go ahead and get this thing off the ground and get this crank pulley off. So I've got another little concern here. There is blue coolant coming out, which is what the supercharger uses. And it's like coming from near the battery. It's wet in there, but these hoses... Okay, never mind. It's not this. I just opened this. This is actually green. That is the coolant for the supercharger. Blue, I bet, is windshield wiper fluid, because I had just filled that up, and I bet you the hose for that is somewhere in this battery area. I don't know exactly where, but thank God. With the blue coolant crisis averted, we can move on to removing the radiator. When you're draining all the coolant out of the system, you need a container to catch everything in. For some reason, I started to take it apart without putting the container underneath. Then as the coolant started pouring out, I started to panic. Then when pulling this hose, I just had to aim it right in the funnel, but that didn't go so well. And then I really started to panic. But by that point, most of it was already on the ground. Oh my God. Oh shit. I'm gonna be so sticky. With the coolant drained, we can pull the radiator. But first, I'll snip these tabs so I can get the fan off. Bleeder hose. Quickly gotta disconnect the hose from the bottom of the radiator, and then the cherry on top. No! Oh my God! Ah! Bruh! What a freaking nightmare. In the end, I might as well have just let all the coolant run on the floor, because that's where it wound up anyways. But then I finally got the radiator out. Radiator is out. Next step is to remove the belt. But first... Oh, shit. Coolant in the freaking eye. Coolant in the eye. Oh, why? Oh, it's gonna burn. Okay. Then once I felt the crank pulley, I thought, that is majorly concerning. Dude, with this thing this loose, this could have caused some serious damage. Now that I knew the problem, I went ahead and ordered a new crank pulley. But this time we were going for a big upgrade. So I got out the old crank bolt. Then the crank pulley just came right off by hand. It is not supposed to do that. Pulley seems fine, but definitely this is loose on there, pretty loose. So I totally can see how that would just spin. Later that evening, Tilo was over, and he wanted to check and make sure that the threads were still good in the crank. Then Lucas convinced me that we need to hack up the wiring harness and delete a bunch of stuff to clean up my engine bay. Dude, you're making me nervous right now.
How close do you want to get with the camera? I'll make you real nervous here.
Whoa, chill, dude.
I'll put my finger on the other side too, so that way I get a little bit of blood in it. Demonetize you. Ooh.
I'm not, I wish I was monetized. I'm nowhere near that. You don't have to worry about that, buddy.
Do you get ads or anything,
they can't take money from me that I don't make. So that's another project that you'll be seeing videos about soon. But back to the task at hand. All right, so it is a couple days later. I grew a beard. Just kidding. We got the new harmonic balancer. Have a catalog of parts, stickers, a hat. This is what you get when you spend $650 on a pulley. Actually, that's including the pinning kit, so not really just the pulley. The pinning kit is a fixture. This is a really solid piece of metal, but this installs over the crank, drill down into it, and it drills a hole in the side of the crank. Then you put one of these pins in there, and then there's a slot in the harmonic balancer for the pin so that it can't slip, which I think may have been my entire issue before. Then I got a new crank bolt, and I'm definitely gonna need to go buy a socket. Here is the crank pulley. Yo, that is actually sick. That's pretty much what the crank pulley looks like. That is a super cool sticker. That is a super cool sticker. Okay, here is the AC belt pulley that installs on the back of the crank pulley. This is the center of it. So here you can see, so the crank pulley is gonna install onto this, but here you can see the slot where that pin will sit down into, and that makes it where even with the torque of the supercharger pulling on it while the engine's trying to spin, that pin being in that slot will prevent this from being able to slip and sort of grind away. Here is the damper itself. That is sick. Here's the sticker and here's the pulley. Wow, that is just so pretty. It's so pretty. It looks so good. Yeah, that is just, wow, a beautiful pulley. So this basically sits in here. Oh, that's a sexy fit. So there is a dimple right here and a dimple right here, and that's where you're supposed to line those up. So I'm gonna see here how this belt fits, just to make sure we got the right belt pattern. This is my belt. Ooh. This thing is just a work of art. That is a beautiful crank pulley. Just wow. ATI really killed it. So before installing the new crank pulley, we had to pin the crank. So I'll take this fixture in the pinning kit and install it over the crank. At first, the threads wouldn't catch on the crank bolt, so I had to tap on the fixture with a mallet. Once I got the threads to catch, I tightened the bolt down to hold the fixture in place. Then I'll get the drill bit and we just drill the hole. Then I can pop the fixture off, wipe it down, and then I can put this pin in. I tapped it a little bit with a hammer, and then it was good to go and ready for the crank pulley. All right, before we switch over and I even start assembling this, I just want to say, look at the old crank pulley and look at the new crank pulley. That is just so sexy. Now it was time to get deep in these instructions. And I say that because these instructions are pretty crazy. And I had another problem. These bolts use Torx Plus bits, which are different from regular Torx bits in that the points are a little bit wider. And I didn't have these. So it looks like this isn't happening in this week's video. We're gonna have to come back next week's video, finish this off. That's unfortunate. I lied, I'm back. I got all of the stuff that we need and we're about to put this pulley on. So there are 6 main bolts which hold the core of the pulley onto the damper. Each of these gets some blue Loctite, and then they're each going to get torqued down to 16 foot-pounds. Next, we're going to install the AC belt pulley. And then there's 3 bolts that hold this on, each getting some blue Loctite and being torqued down to 16 foot-pounds. Then I'm going to slide the pulley on as much as I can, tap it on a little bit more with the mallet. Then I'll use this crank pulley installer kit in order to tighten it down and get the crank pulley to fully seat on the crank. Before we put the new crank bolt in, we're supposed to put RTV sealant on both sides of the washer. I suppose this keeps oil from getting out. Lastly, I'm going to put some red Loctite on the threads of the crank bolt before we put it in. Naturally, I almost dropped it right here, and I got red Loctite on myself and RTV sealant on myself, so I had to wipe it off real quick. Of course, freaking covered in red Loctite. Finally putting in the crank bolt, and I have it set to 230 foot-pounds. It is on, and the belt's installed. That's beautiful. That is beautiful. What a beautiful, beautiful crank pulley. Wow. No! Oh my God! Ah! Bruh! What a freaking nightmare. Ah!